Hey learner, welcome back for another deep dive.
Always pleasure to be here.
Today we're going to be talking about something pretty fascinating and relevant, I think, to a lot of our listeners, especially with the Seven Seeds Prompted Journal coming out pretty soon.
Absolutely, yeah.
We're going to be talking about handwriting and specifically how it connects to the way our brains learn and remember.
Yeah, it's something that I think a lot of people have maybe an intuitive sense of, like,
Right.
oh yeah, handwriting is good for you, but we're really going to dive into the research. You've sent over some really interesting articles and research papers on this topic, and yeah, our mission today is to, kind of distill those key insights, understand what makes handwriting, such a unique cognitive activity, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of people think, oh, handwriting is kind of outdated. We have all these digital tools now.
Mm.
Why bother with handwriting? But as we'll see, there's actually a lot of really compelling evidence that it does something really unique for our brains.
Right. Yeah.
So one of the most surprising findings from recent neuroscience research is that handwriting seems to engage our brains in a much more comprehensive way than typing does. There was a 2024 study published in Frontiers in Psychology that found that handwriting activates almost the entire brain,
Wow.
whereas typing shows significantly less neural activity.
So that's pretty wild. I mean, what do you think that difference in brain activity means for how we learn and remember?
I think it's really telling, right?
Yeah.
Because it suggests that, when we handwrite, we're not just engaging in this, kind of simple motor
Mm.
activity. There's something more going on. It's
Wow.
almost like it's lighting up, all these different areas of the brain, and that's got to be having some kind of impact on the way that we process and retain information.
Yeah, it's not just about the physical act of writing, it's about all of the sort of cascading effects that that has on our brain activity.
And one of the things that the research points to is the idea of stronger brain connectivity,
Hmm.
particularly in these specific frequency bands called theta and alpha waves, which are associated with memory consolidation and deep focus.
Right.
Now, those are some pretty technical terms. Can you break down for us what those frequencies are and why they're important in this context?
Sure, yeah. So theta waves, they're these brain waves that oscillate at a particular frequency, and they're really heavily involved in the process of memory consolidation. So basically, when we learn something new, it's not immediately stored permanently in our brains.
Mm-hmm.
It has to go through this process of consolidation, of becoming more stable.
Right.
And theta waves are really important for that.
So it's like the glue that helps the memory stick.
Exactly, yeah. And then alpha waves are a little bit different. They're associated with states of relaxed focus and attention.
Okay.
And so, when we're engaged in an activity that requires us to be focused but not overly stressed or anxious, we tend to see more alpha wave activity. And so the fact that handwriting seems to boost both theta and alpha waves, it suggests that it's putting our brains in this optimal state for learning.
Yeah, it's like it's creating the perfect conditions for our brains to absorb and retain information.
Exactly.
And this isn't just speculation, there's actual research to back this up. A study from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, they identified at least 16 distinct neural connections that become much more active when we handwrite compared to typing.
Wow.
And these connections are primarily located in the parietal and central brain regions, which are involved in processing senses, like touch and sight, and controlling movement.
Right. So that makes a lot of sense, right?
Right.
Because when we handwrite, we're using our hands, we're feeling the pen on the paper, we're seeing the letters that we're forming.
Right.
So all of that sensory and motor information is being processed by those regions of the brain.
Right. And the researchers were even more explicit in their findings. I mean, they actually stated that these patterns, these connectivity patterns they observed, were crucial for memory formation and for encoding new information, and therefore are beneficial for learning. That's a pretty strong statement.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty clear indication that there's something really special happening in the brain when we handwrite.
Yeah, it's not just, oh, it's a nice activity. It's actually having a profound impact on our cognitive abilities.
Great.
And this brings us to another key aspect of this whole thing, which is the idea of sensory-motor integration. Can you explain what that means and how it relates to handwriting?
Sure. So sensor-motor integration basically refers to the way that our brains coordinate information from our senses and our motor system. So when we're handwriting, we're using our eyes to see the letters that we're forming. We're using our hands to control the pen. We're feeling the texture of the paper. All of that information is being integrated in the brain.
Right.
And this integration is thought to be really important for learning and memory because it creates these richer, more multisensory representations of the information.
So it's like the more senses you involve, the more deeply the information gets embedded in your brain.
Exactly, yeah. It's
Yeah,
like creating these multiple pathways to the memory.
right.
And so when you go to retrieve that information later, you have all of these different ways of accessing it.
That makes sense.
And it seems like the increased theta and alpha wave activity that we were talking about earlier is specifically linked to these sensory motor integration mechanisms. So it's like handwriting is really boosting the brain's ability to integrate information from all of these different sources.
It's like it's giving your brain a full workout.
Exactly, yeah. And it's not just a physical workout, it's a cognitive workout as well.
Now, one of the things that might seem counterintuitive about all of this is that handwriting is obviously slower and less efficient than typing. I mean, you can type a lot faster than you can write. So how does this slower, more deliberate pace of handwriting actually contribute to better memory?
Well, that's where the concept of desirable difficulty comes in.
Okay, I love that phrase.
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea. So
Mhm.
basically, the idea is that sometimes making things a little bit more difficult for ourselves can actually lead to better learning and memory
Okay.
because it forces our brains to work harder.
Right.
So in the case of handwriting, because it's slower, we have to be more selective about what we write down. We have to think more carefully about the information. We have to process it more deeply. And that deeper processing leads to stronger memories.
So it's like the extra effort that we put in when we're handwriting, it's actually what helps to solidify the information in our brains.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like, if you want to build muscle, you have to lift weights.
Right.
If you want to build strong memories, you have to challenge your brain.
Right.
And handwriting is one way of doing that.
And there's another aspect to this too, which is that unlike the uniform tap, tap, tapping of typing, each handwritten letter involves a unique set of muscle movements. So writing an A feels different from writing a B, and so on. So how does this variation in motor patterns contribute to enhanced memory?
So when we write each letter by hand, we're creating these distinct motor patterns, these neural pathways, if you will, that are associated with each letter.
Okay.
And because those patterns are so unique, it's thought that it helps to create these stronger, more distinct representations of the letters in our brains.
So it's like each letter has its own little neural signature.
Exactly, yeah. And that makes it easier for us to differentiate between letters, to recognize them, and ultimately to remember them.
And this leads us to the idea of production effects, which is another kind of jargony term that we should probably unpack.
Sure.
So basically, the idea behind production effects is that physically producing information, whether it's by speaking, drawing, or in this case, handwriting, enhances memory. So can you explain how that works? How does the act of physically creating something help us to remember it better?
Yeah, so the production effect is this really well-established phenomenon in cognitive psychology.
Right.
And it basically boils down to the fact that when we actively produce information, we engage with it on a much deeper level than if we just passively consume it.
Right.
So when we handwrite something, for example, we're not just reading it or hearing it, we're actually creating it.
Right.
And that act of creation requires us to think more deeply about the information, to process it more thoroughly, and to make connections to our existing knowledge.
So it's like it's forcing us to kind of make it our own.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
We're not just copying it down, we're internalizing it, we're making sense of it,
Right.
and that's what leads to stronger memories.
Now, there's another interesting aspect to this, which is that some research suggests that handwriting might actually promote a more positive emotional state during learning compared to typing. So how might that be? And how might our feelings influence how effectively we remember things?
Well, we know that emotions play a really important role in learning and memory. When we're in a positive emotional state, our brains are more receptive to new information. They're
Oh,
more likely to pay attention, or more motivated to learn.
right.
And so if handwriting does indeed foster a more positive emotional state, that could definitely contribute to its memory-enhancing effects.
Yeah, it's like it's making learning more enjoyable.
Exactly, yeah. And when we enjoy something, we're more likely to remember it.
Now let's talk about some of the specific research findings that support all of this.
Okay.
So one study found that students who took handwritten notes showed better conceptual understanding than those who typed their notes.
Right.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it goes back to what we were talking about earlier with desirable difficulty.
Okay.
Because handwriting is slower, you can't possibly write down everything that the professor is saying. So you have to be more selective, you have to summarize, you have to paraphrase, and that forces you to really think about the material and to understand it at a deeper level.
Yeah, it's like you're creating your own little mental map of the information,
Exactly.
as opposed to just kind of mindlessly transcribing everything.
Right.
There was also a really interesting study about learning new words, where they found that handwriting resulted in a greater N400 priming effect,
Mm.
which is basically a neurological marker of learning progress compared to typing.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Now, I know that's a pretty technical term. Can you explain what that means and why it's significant?
Sure. So the N400 is this event-related potential. It's a brain wave that we can measure using EEG.
Okay.
And it's basically a marker of how quickly and easily our brains are able to access the meaning of a word.
Okay.
So a larger N400 response indicates that the word is more easily recognized and understood.
So it's like it's a sign that the word is really sunk in.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And so the fact that they found a larger N400 response for handwriting compared to typing, it suggests that the physical act of writing down the word helped to solidify its meaning in memory more effectively.
So it's like it's creating a stronger connection between the word and its meaning.
Exactly.
And this wasn't just limited to vocabulary either.
Okay.
The research also shows that letter recognition itself benefits more from handwriting practice than typing. And this is particularly important for kids who are just learning to read and write.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, letter recognition is foundational for literacy, right?
Right.
So if we want kids to become good readers and writers, we need to make sure that they have a strong foundation in letter recognition.
And handwriting seems to be a really effective way to do that.
Right. Yeah.
And all of this points back to the idea that handwriting enhances brain connectivity, particularly in those areas that are involved in memory and learning.
Mm-hmm.
And this increased connectivity is thought to be one of the main reasons why handwriting is so beneficial for our brains.
Right. It's like it's creating this network of interconnected neurons. And the more connections we have, the stronger our memories become.
And this brings us to another concept that we touched on earlier, which is embodied cognition.
Right.
So can you explain how the physical act of handwriting embodies thought and creates these bodily memories that enhance our mental representations?
So embodied cognition is this idea that our thinking is not just something that happens in our heads. It's deeply intertwined with our bodies and our physical experiences.
Okay.
So when we handwrite something, we're not just using our brains to think about the words, we're
Yeah.
also using our bodies to create them.
Right.
And that physical experience, the feeling of the pen on the paper, the movement of our hand, all of that contributes to our understanding of the information.
So it's like it's grounding the information in our physical reality.
Exactly, yeah. It's making it more real, more tangible,
Right.
and that can help us to remember it better.
So given all of these amazing benefits of handwriting, what do you think the implications are for education and for lifelong learning?
Well, I think it's clear that handwriting should have a place in the classroom,
Hmm.
especially in the early years when kids are first learning to read and write.
Right.
You know, we shouldn't be so quick to replace handwriting with typing and digital devices.
Right.
Because there's something really special that happens when we engage in the physical act of writing.
Yeah, it's like it's laying the foundation for all sorts of other cognitive skills.
Exactly.
And what about for adults? How can we incorporate more handwriting into our own lives to enhance our learning and memory?
Well, I think there are all sorts of ways to do that.
Okay.
You know, we can take handwritten notes instead of typing them.
Right.
We can write in a journal. We can write letters to friends and family. We
Right.
can even just doodle or draw.
Yeah, anything that gets us using our hands to create something.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's important to remember that handwriting doesn't have to be perfect. It's not about calligraphy or anything like that. It's just about the act of writing itself.
Absolutely, yeah. It's the process that's important, not the product.
So the takeaway here is that even in our increasingly digital world, there's still a lot of value in engaging with the physical world, in using our hands to create things, and in slowing down and really taking the time to process information.
Right.
And handwriting is a really great way to do all of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's this ancient practice, right? But it's still so relevant today.
Yeah, and it's a practice that can really benefit us in so many ways.
Absolutely.
So speaking of handwriting, let's circle back to our upcoming 7 Seeds Prompted Journal.
Okay.
This is something that we've been really excited about for a while now, and it's specifically designed to be a tactile, handwritten experience.
Right.
So the prompts are there to guide you, but there's also plenty of space for you to just free write and explore your own thoughts and feelings.
Yeah, I think that's a really great combination. Because the prompts can help to get us started, but then we also have the freedom to go wherever our minds take us.
Right.
And I think that's really important for journaling, to allow ourselves that space to just be creative and to explore.
And we really believe that the act of writing by hand can enhance this process of self-discovery and reflection.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's something about the physical act of writing that just helps us to connect with our thoughts and feelings in a deeper way.
Yeah, it's like it's slowing down our minds, allowing us to really process what's going on inside of us.
Right.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What stands out to you most about the science of handwriting? How might you incorporate more handwriting into your own life, whether it's for learning, for reflection, or just for the sheer joy of it?
Yeah, and what are some of the challenges that you face when it comes to handwriting? Is it hard to find the time? Is it hard to break out of the habit of typing everything?
We really want to hear from you, so share your thoughts and insights in the comments below.
Absolutely, and be sure to like, subscribe, and follow for more explorations into the fascinating world of learning and personal growth.
Thanks for joining us, learner. Until next time.